The real power of neuroplasticity is that dormant potential is sitting inside your brain. So the capacity for you to become that person exists. It's knit into the basic logic of how your brain works. And now the question is, how do you access it?
Finally, get back to a life with exercise. And this is your first step. We're going to start getting you moving. I'm Lynn Lindberg, your bad couch guru. Hello, it's Lynn. Welcome to the Couch to Active podcast, where we believe that exercise should not be dreadful, but getting off the couch is the hardest thing we do. Today we have with us a very special guest, James Garrett, who is the creator of Brain by Design, which is a company that helps individuals understand the concepts of neuroplasticity and how it helps them create change in their lives. Trust me, we're not going to be using a whole bunch of four-syllabled words this entire podcast. James does a fabulous job of explaining this concept in terms that makes a lot of sense to all of us and satisfies the nerdy science geek in me. So we will get to James in just a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about last week's episode. If you missed it, it is a must listen to, or more than a must listen to, it's a must go to the blog page for this one. And that is found on couch2active.com/28. This episode, we talked about what it takes to go from essentially couch potato, mostly sedentary, all the way up to truly increasing your cardiovascular strength. And it's based on research, it's based on science, and they use men and women. I'm really excited about this, and the resource there is free for you to download and to print. So if you have not done that yet, you definitely, absolutely want to look at this. It's going to help you see very clearly and easily what it is that you need to do in order to get that cardiovascular strength stronger. And while you're doing that, stick with me and I'll help you get off the couch in the first place so you can do the exercise. So that was last week's episode. And then I also want to go back a couple more episodes to the one called Let's Talk About Turning 40 with Beth Learn. This was a really great interview, and we talked about all kinds of topics. And I realized that I need to backpedal on one statement I made, and not actually backpedal, but clarify, right? And that is, Beth and I were talking about GI issues that happen when you get older. And I made the comment that hell will freeze over before I go down the depends aisle. And I need to backpedal on that because I don't for 1 second want anybody to think that I was being judgmental, even in the slightest bit, not one single bit. My heart was not there at all. But I re-listened to it and I had that, oh my gosh, I could be misunderstood. I was just truly being flippant, but I could be misunderstood. So if you missed it, don't worry about that flippant comment I've made, but if you've been hanging on to it, just know that wasn't where my heart was. My sincere apologies if that offended you at all, but that was on the Let's Talk About Turning 40 episode. Alrighty, James Garrett. I'm excited to bring him to you because I approached James and I said, at Couch to Active, we talk a lot about how to get off the couch. And most of us aren't literally stuck on the couch. And we don't usually talk about habit as a habit, pun intended, because there's so much more to the concept of habit and how to actually make it work. It's so much more than that old platitude of 21 days makes a habit. In fact, he even says that statement is wrong and explains how and why, which I thought was fascinating. So I brought James on and I said, could you explain to us in more detail the brain and how the brain works and what's going on to make a habit in a way that's useful information that this Couch to Active audience can use so that you will be more likely to succeed with new habits you're trying to build or with new habits you are building. He says self-talk has a lot to do with it. So I'm catching myself already. James talks through that. And at the end, he shares a really amazing personal story of where this all came from And I just felt blessed that he shared this with us because he thought that this audience in particular may resonate with his own personal story. So I'll, no spoilers, I'll save that for you guys. And then at the end, I have two things I'll be going over with you. One is the key takeaways. So I'm going to give you a couple of key takeaways, AKA homework assignments, for you to do as a result of this that will help drive that change that you want to see in your life. And then the second one is a recap of what's happening with the podcast in July and August. I'm excited about it. And so we're going to recap that also. So with that, I bring you James Garrett, the creator of Brain by Design. So happy to have you here with us today on the Couch to Active podcast.
Thanks for having me.
James, I want to just dive right in and start off with what inspired you to create a brainy company? What even is Brain by Design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't grow up knowing anything really about the brain or psychology or anything, but I stumbled into it in university. It's like one of those things where, you take a random class not knowing what to expect and you find it just like blows your mind, right? And so this was what it was for me in psychology. And at the time, there was this budding movement of positive psychology.
Yes, we love that here. Mm-hmm.
So these were early days, a couple of years after Martin Seligman made his big announcement that he wants the field to move in this direction. And I was really inspired by studying happiness and studying flourishing. And so I decided to get into this deeper and deeper. And over time, I fell in love with a concept within brain science called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is just the idea that brains can rewire themselves and the science of how that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon Bagley, very famous science writer, calls neuroplasticity the hopeful science. Because what it means is that you can change, right? You can become the best version of yourself.
I am not doomed to be a product of my mother or grandmother, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, I had a wonderful mother. It's really that concept of we can change at a very core fundamental level who we are, yes?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, much more than, the implications of neuroplasticity are just barely being understood. We really only grasped how much our brains can change, in the last 20 years or so since, fMRI technologies and being able to see inside the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it was harder to see change in the brain, obviously, because it's invisible to us. It's inside of our skull, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really overturned a century of scientific, scientists believed that until that point that our brains kind of stopped changing around the age of 25. Turns out it's not only untrue, but wildly untrue. Until the day you die, you're in your hippocampus, you're generating 500 to 1,000 new neurons every single day.
Until the day I die.
Until the day you die.
Wow. So grandma really can learn how to use that iPhone.
So grandma can learn how to use the iPhone. That's right.
That's a whole nother topic.
And interestingly, part of the problem is the belief that we can't is what actually creates a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh my gosh.
Because brain change happens when you challenge the brain. So if you end up believing you can't and therefore you don't challenge the brain, then of course no change happens. Then you see evidence for what you already previously believed. Whereas if you do challenge the brain, then you see change happen.
So we've got science saying that old mantra of if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right.
That's exactly right.
We've got science showing that. Fantastic. Well, for Couch to Active, I really wanted to bring you on, James, because I shy away from talking about the word habit and habit making. In fact, in the book, Couch to Active, the word habit isn't even in the book at all. Except I think maybe one of the recommendations at the front of the book, somebody said it's great for making new habits. Because I understand that habits, there's so much more to it and nuanced than just the old adage of do something for 21 days. That's what we've all been taught. And then you have a new habit formed. So talk to us about that and how that's bogus. That's my words, I know, but.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that scientists have realized is it takes a little bit longer than 21 days. The actual best science right now is the average time it takes to form a habit is 66 days.
66 days. So we were way wrong. We weren't even close.
We weren't really close. No. And then within that 66, which is of course the median, the midpoint, you've got a big range. So in this particular study, the range was from 18 to 254 days.
Oh my gosh.
With most of them falling around that 2-month mark on average. It's interesting because what it means is some habits might take a little bit more than 66 depending on their level of difficulty.
Gotcha.
Some might take a little bit less if they're fairly straightforward. So I usually use this as a good benchmark, though. If I'm going to form a new habit, I need to do it daily for 2 months. I wish your listeners could see. I actually have these sort of calendar systems you can kind of see.
I do see them on the wall there. Yeah.
Every 2 months, I do a new habit stack where I'm doing 3 new habits. I don't do more than that because willpower is an exhaustible resource.
Yes.
Habits in the beginning take a lot of willpower. If you're doing more than that, you can run through or burn through that precious energy of keeping yourself aligned with your goals. It takes a lot of energy to do that. So I like 3s. Brain remembers things well in packages of 3s. So I do 3 habits and then I text my accountability partner on the 4th for the 4th X. For those who are wondering, I have my system is I print a blank calendar.
Okay.
Google blank calendar.
I've got my blank calendar in front of me. Actually, no joke, real story, just came in the mail today.
Oh yeah.
Yes, blank calendar. Okay, then what do I do with my blank calendar?
I divide mine into 4 squares every day. So I do
every day into 4 squares. Okay.
Each square represents a different habit, one of the 3 habits that I'm working on for those 2 months. And then I put an X when I do that habit. And usually I do them as a cluster. So like, for example, my morning routine is reading, exercise, and meditation, REM. So this is my morning REM instead of my nighttime REM. Right?
That's what I was going to say. There's a little play on acronyms there.
Yeah. So all these little tricks help your brain remember, and it sort of matters.
Yeah.
And I know how long it takes me. It takes me an hour. I do 30 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of exercise, 10 minutes of meditation, and I do it all back to back. So they're habits stacked. And of course, that's in my life, that's the routine that's the easiest because it's back to back. I know when my 5-year-old wakes up, right? It's always around 7:30. So if I get up at 6, I have that 6 to 7 window. Now, everybody doesn't have that.
Gotcha.
You got to figure out a way, time and place to make it work for you.
Great. My morning habit stack right now is first cup of coffee, second cup of coffee, pet the dog. So I think I need to update that a little bit.
I thought you were going to say third cup of coffee.
No. Oh my gosh, I love it. Okay, so you've got those habits. You're stacking them, working 66 days. So 66 days, I heard you say, it sounds like it's not that I'm looking for, I'm a 66-day person or I'm an 80-day person. It's some habits I'm going to be able to pick up sooner and easier, and other habits are going to take me longer, just depending on the difficulty and how many things get in the way.
Yeah, it's really level of difficulty, and all of that is dependent on your previous history with that habit. So big exercise, and some of us have had success with exercise in the past and maybe are off the wagon. Others of us have not had that successful. If you haven't, then you're going to want to appropriately shrink the size of the habit. So we call these mini habits. I like to think of them in intervals of 10 to like 10 minutes for something. Go for a walk for 10 minutes. That's the mini habit. When you look at the literature on mini habit, it can actually go a lot lower than that. In fact, B.J. Fogg, the professor from Stanford who discovered these, he calls them tiny habits.
Oh, I like it.
He actually did 2 push-ups after he went pee every single time. That was his mini habit.
Oh my gosh. He could probably do a lot of push-ups now.
Yeah.
Because it adds up.
It adds up, and what you end up doing is a lot more bonus reps because the habit is so small. Your brain just wants to hit the goal. It doesn't really care how big the goal is.
Yep.
It's like yes or no. I either got it or I didn't. So once it hits the 2 push-ups, your brain's highly motivated to add some more on top of that. So, he ended up doing hundreds and hundreds of push-ups a day, even though his goal remained 2 push-ups.
Oh my gosh. I wonder if he was ever tired and said, I'm just going to not drink water today. No. Essentially that concept, I imagine there's a bit of a dopamine rush that comes with that of even if it's only 2 push-ups, you succeed. And then that goes into your self-talk. Yay, I succeeded. Can you talk to me a little bit about self-talk? I imagine that's a really important piece of creating a new habit and as an indicator of being successful or not. Yes?
It is. Yeah, you're right. So when you are successful at something, what ends up happening is it boosts something called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your level of confidence that you can achieve a certain goal. If you set out to do X, how confident are you? How much do you believe it in your bones, right?
Yeah.
That you're going to be successful at hitting that goal. Think of it like 1 to 10, your self-efficacy level on a 1 to 10 scale. With every different activity in your life, you're going to have different levels of self-confidence. So if you've had, again, high success at, for example, learning French, then learning languages, you might have really high self-efficacy. So if you're going to learn Spanish next, you're going to be able to challenge yourself at a higher level, and you're probably going to be able to stick to that goal. But the key here is actually small wins. What Albert Bandura, also at Stanford, has shown is that, again, it doesn't matter how big the win is. What matters is that you hit the goal. So this is, again, why mini habits are so brilliant, because if you can look back at a history of small wins, then suddenly what happens is 2 things. One is you start feeling like, I don't want to break my winning streak, right?
Absolutely,
Which is sort of what happens when you create a system like a calendar and you can actually see the progress. But the other thing that's really powerful, which Teresa Mabel at Harvard Business School has shown, is that visual progress is one of the most powerful well springs of motivation.
Oh, interesting.
So part of the problem with mental or emotional progress, psychological progress, head progress, whatever you want to call it, is that it's invisible. So if you're meditating every day, you are rewiring your brain, but again, your brain is locked behind your skull. So you can't see that physical change you might experience subjectively, more patience, better relationships, etc., which are all good, but it gets a little bit foggy. And so what you're trying to do is externalize progress into a system that reminds you, gives you a feedback loop that then re-energizes your brain and gets you excited to do it again. It's called an upward spiral.
Yes.
It becomes contagious.
We talk about spiraling up. And what does it take for folks to spiral up versus spiraling down? Oh my gosh. Okay, so visual progress, I just have to ask the question. Is it just on a piece of paper, or is it my goal is to clean the closets in my house and now I have that visual progress of that? Or I even hate to go there because I don't want exercise to be about that visual progress, but is that why the desire to see sweaty, ripped, 6-pack abs in a bikini body becomes so powerful because of that visual progress? Is there a relation?
Yeah. No, I hear everything you're saying on that.
Because I am so anti go for the beach body thing at all.
Sure.
I'm very, very loud about that it's health, it's wellness, it's mental health. But so I even hate bringing it up. But what do you think about that?
I think over time, technology is going to help us to see inward progress better. Open Water, young startup in San Francisco right now, is in Silicon Valley, is working on mobile fMRI. So we already have mobile EEG, which is fancy. These words just kill me. Electroencephalogram is what EEG means. But basically, it's a measure of electrical activity of your brain. This is the technology that's currently being mobilized. What I'm talking about right now is an emerging sector called brain tech or neurotech. Within the next 5 years, we're all going to be using it. It doesn't quite exist yet. This is one of the invisible revolutions. We all know VR is coming, virtual reality, and these other things are on the horizon. This is one of the quiet ones, but it will be massive because of its power to, again, help us become the best versions of ourselves. And one of the things it will help us do is to measure internal progress. I'm actually right now in the middle of a project I'm running called the Deep Change Project.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to rewire my own brain in 2019 and actually track that progress. And so I'm trying to grapple with what it means to measure things like heart rate variability and EEG tracking over time. And one of the ones I wanted to measure, what ended up being prohibitively expensive, and that I didn't have these weird barriers, like I didn't have a research institution backing, so they wouldn't even let me.
Oh my gosh.
Was BDNF. BDNF is like Miracle-Gro for your brain. So if you're high levels of BDNF, you can infer that there's high levels of neuroplasticity happening.
Ah, interesting.
And so this is one that, again, it's sort of like silly that we don't have access to this, but this is all coming.
Let me go back. You said mobile EEG. Is that right? EKG. EEG.
EEG. EKG is heart. EEG is brain.
And when you said mobile, what does that look like? Is that a device that I'm wearing and walking around with, or is this a bigger device that's in a truck that goes from city to city?
You're wearing it. So
okay.
One of the most interesting ones is Muse, which is a meditation headband. So it goes literally right across your forehead. So the contact is right here and goes over your ears. They're a company that sort of their product is furthest along. It's reading your brain signals and then giving you neurofeedback or biofeedback is basically just the idea that you're holding up a mirror to your brain and telling it what it's doing. So sometimes when your brain can actually see the activity that's generating, it can then self-regulate and change. So with the meditation, the actual feedback are sounds. So if your brain is getting kind of stormy or scattered, it isn't coherent. You actually get thunder kind of sounds in your headphones.
Wow.
Whereas if it's very, let's call it like in a peak alpha range, in a sort of calm and focused, centered place, you get these like nice birds chirping. So your brain starts learning, gets these subtle rewards for when it gets into certain states. And as it does this, it starts wanting to get into those states more through a process of classical conditioning.
Oh, fascinating. Oh my goodness. My brain just goes on these random, completely off topic, but I could just imagine the next generation of parents parenting their children and their children having access to this technology and saying, Mom and Dad, my EEG says I'm in a stormy mood right now. We need to wait till the birds start chirping before I can do my homework.
That's right. Well, along those lines, one of the best pieces of technology out there, it's not even out yet. The founders sent me their prototype and there's a lot of really good ones out there. But one of the most interesting ones is Apollo Neuroscience. They're based in Pittsburgh, and theirs is a technology that neutralizes stress. And so it measures, again, your heart rate variability, which is an indication of how stressed you are or not. And then as you start elevating, it will activate a sequence of vibrations and sound frequencies on your wrist or your ankle that stimulates your parasympathetic calming system in the body and actually just chills you out. It's like cuts stress off at the knees. So you can imagine how powerful that becomes, especially with kids. So I was, of course, using this with my daughter, which she's wound up. She's kind of a night owl, this kind of thing. Put the Apollo on her wrist, and suddenly she's like, let's do story time.
No. Okay. I need to look that up. Apollo, get one of those myself.
Because again, it's part of the problem is it's hard to think your way out of stress once you're elevated. It's easier to prevent stress before it happens. Once you're elevated, it's really hard to talk yourself down. Once that happens, what you want to do is actually work from the bottom up instead of the top down. If you work from the bottom up, what that looks like is some kind of stimulation. And again, this one literally is so gentle, it feels like a cat purring on your wrist. And so again, this just to give you a flavor of what's coming, but it's really powerful.
Fascinating. And just, okay, I could go down that rat hole forever because I'm thinking, and then we could get rid of so many pharmaceuticals and maybe that'll be healthy. And
what really will start happening is instead of intervening with chemicals, we'll start intervening with non-intrusive means that are actually healthier for our bodies.
Wow, that would just... Oh, we need that. We definitely need that. Now, I want to go back to, you mentioned a little bit about the big change project that you're working on. How can somebody know? Because one of the things I think we get stuck in our ruts or our fishbowl, and we don't actually know or recognize that we need a radical change. And how would you know, or how would you help someone know that they need to make a big change in their life? And if they did identify this, what would you recommend for them today as their first steps for making change in their life? Let's just pretend it's some big, massive, radical change they need.
Well, think of it this way. We all have these where we are today versions of ourselves, and then we have these ideal versions of ourselves. If you reflect on this, let's say you do a journal exercise and try to imagine, what are the traits I would like to embody? Who would I like to show up as in the world? Would it be courage? Would it be creative? Would it be fearless? Would it be other-oriented? Like, who is the best you can imagine? Now, try to get that person or vision of yourself in mind. And now the real power of neuroplasticity is that dormant potential is sitting inside your brain. So the capacity for you to become that person exists. It's knit into the basic logic of how your brain works. And now the question is, how do you access it?
Yes.
How do you become it? How do you actually rewire it to actually literally, there's this sort of idea in popular culture that we only use 10% of our brains.
I've heard that.
Yeah,
Is it true?
We've all heard that. It's not true.
How would I even measure that?
Lovely, right? But here's what's so powerful is if that were true, let's imagine it were, that would mean that we have 10 times more power in our brains than say. Turns out we've got the question wrong. It's not about what we're using currently. It's about today potential as compared to future potential.
Yep.
Change happens over time. We forget this. So brains get tripped up on this. This is why short-term gratification sometimes wins over long-term goals and plans. But change happens over time, and that future potential, we actually way underestimated the number. Let me just give you a little bit, tiny neuroscience.
Yes. I have a dear, dear cousin who is a neuroscientist, and I love my time with her. I don't get enough time with her, so go for it.
I'm going to try to analogize this to driving through the Nevada desert. I don't know if any of you have ever driven from like Las Vegas to California to LA.
Mm-hmm.
But you can kind of imagine sagebrush, and it's just flat and dead in a sense. So I imagine driving on I-15, you pull over to the side of the road, you actually start driving on the sagebrush. Of course, you have to think, what happens to the speed of the car? I slow way down. I stop talking to the person next to me, and I'm really focused on what's right in front of me. I've got to be super vigilant if this is going to be safe. Everything in you wants to get back to the freeway.
Oh, and the kids in the back seat are like, Mom, where are you going?
Mom, what are we doing? This is crazy. Dust flying everywhere. Like, you're insane, right?
Go back to where it's safe.
Yeah. Go back to where it's particularly easy, actually safe. And I'm glad you brought up safe. It is
safe. Easy. Okay.
And you don't have to think about anything else, right? But if you keep driving on that same path again and again and again, and maybe multiple cars start driving on this, eventually tire tracks will form. And if this keeps happening over time, a whole dirt road will start forming. And maybe you can go 20 or 30 miles an hour at this point. Now, if this keeps happening, there's enough demand for that new pathway. Ultimately, the Nevada Department of Transportation is going to be like, well, we need to pave this thing.
We better build a road. Yeah.
Yeah. A new route to LA. Clearly, there's a lot of demand for this. So,
because they want to conserve energy, and we're going to tie this into energy usage in our brain too. So, but don't let me derail you. Go for it.
Yes.
I feel like I'm getting free coaching.
No,
here,
no,
James.
you're right. You're right.
It's
an energy question. So it takes a lot of energy to create that demand. But what will happen over time, eventually the Nevada Department of Transportation will pave it. Then you can go 60 or 70 miles an hour. And then if it becomes a multi-lane freeway, of course, you can go
even more.
Yeah, 80 miles an hour. So this is purely demand, meaning that you're driving on a kind of somewhat unpleasant, somewhat unused pathway is what strengthens it. And then over time convinces, right, in this case, the Department of Transportation to invest resources in that new pathway. This is exactly how our brains work.
Okay. You are brilliant. I was telling James before the interview here that everything that James does, his website, his emails, they make it so easy for the brain to understand. And I see it clearly in my head now. I see the path. I see driving down it. And of course, it makes sense. We're going to pave that path if we keep using it, but we have to keep using it.
You have to keep using it. And this is the hard part. So think of those 66 days, right?
Yeah.
So going from like tire tracks to full, 6-lane freeway, that takes, again, good ballpark is 2 months. It's going to take 2 months before it becomes automatic, before it becomes easy, before it becomes second nature, before you don't have to think about it. Right? You just do it. This is just what I do. I just exercise every morning. It's not a decision anymore. It's an automatic behavior. And that's what a habit is. Your brain does the same thing. It invests neural resources into strengthen those pathways. One of the most interesting ones, and this is back to the statistic about power, of how much power our brains have, dormant power. So neurons look like trees, not like circles. In high school class, we think of cells as circles, right? So your brain is made of about 86 billion neurons on average.
I don't even know what that is.
So yeah.
I mean, I know what 86 billion is, but that's just hard to even imagine.
It's hard to imagine, right? So you have 86 billion little trees in your head. That's one way to think of it. Because neurons look like trees. Neurons are the cells of your brain. Every tree has 5,000 to 10,000 branches.
Oh my gosh.
So you've got trillions of potential connections, and each branch is a potential connecting point to a neighboring neuron. All right. So I want to simplify this. In the middle, there's a big trunk. The trunk of the neuron or the trunk of the tree. That's the axon. So what happens is when a neuron fires, the signal, the neurochemicals shoot down the trunk of the tree and out the roots and onto the next neuron. Now, the trunk of the tree is wrapped in this material called myelin sheath.
I had it. I knew it was myelin or something. Woohoo.
Myelin, yeah.
I feel a little bit smart now.
You've got it. You've got it. It's not terribly complicated.
Yeah.
So myelin it looks like little sausage links on the trunk of the tree. Mm-hmm. Basically what it is, it's like pavement. It's actually insulation for the trunk of the tree. So what happens is as you start insulating that deeper and deeper and deeper, the neuron works more efficiently. Think of the myelin like pavement.
Yes.
The signal actually travels much faster. So an uninsulated neuron travels at about 2 miles an hour. That's how fast the signal passes down that axon.
Wait, 2 miles an hour?
2 miles per hour.
Okay.
So it crawls.
Okay, I was going to say that's slow. Okay.
So no insulation or poorly insulated about 2 miles an hour. You insulate that fully and it can get up to 50 plus layers deep. It fires up to 200 miles an hour.
Fascinating.
So
wow.
Already raw processing power, we jumped from 2 to 200. So that's 100-fold increase in terms of, again, raw speed and efficiency.
That's from tricycle to my pretend Tesla with a pedal to the metal.
That's right. That's exactly right. And then the other part that's so powerful is they call it a refractory period, which is how long it takes between firings.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So basically wind back up and fire again. How long does that take? Well, with a fully insulated neuron, it reduces that time by up to 30 times.
Wow.
So for every one firing of an uninsulated neuron, a fully insulated neuron will fire 30 times.
30 times at 200 miles an hour, as opposed to one time at 2 miles an hour. Wow.
So just, you do the math, 30 times 100. In terms of the difference, it's 3,000 times more powerful. So a single neuron has in it latent potential, dormant potential, waiting to be accessed, waiting to be unleashed, 3,000 times more power than it's currently operating at, potentially. This is what I mean when we think about, okay, so how powerful is my brain? How much could I really do? Well, if you're looking at how your brain is actually built and how to access that power, it's wild how much latent potential we have sitting inside of us.
Wow. Okay. So does this next question I have for you make even any sense as far as who do you see as being usually the most successful at creating this change from the tricycle to the Tesla versus who tends to be the least successful, or what characteristic traits am I looking for in myself to get to that speed?
The first is actually, I think, belief. You've got to believe that you can change. And this isn't a hard one anymore. You just got to learn some basic science. So Carol Dweck at Stanford calls this a growth mindset. Growth mindset as opposed to like a fixed mindset. So there's a lot of us have this idea that we're born with a certain amount of intelligence or a certain amount of talent or a certain amount of, I'm not a math person. Yeah.
And our generation was told people don't change. Right? Yeah. That's an old tried and true is what people would say, but that mindset's important. Yeah.
What's important to know about that is that it's not only that will sort of create a whole series of consequences, right? If you believe that, challenge is going to be a threat, right? Because challenge might expose how not good you are at something. So this happens in school all the time, right? If somebody has a fixed mindset, even if they've been very good at something, like say they've been very good at violin. They've gotten very good at the violin. And everybody says, you're so amazing. And they talk about how much raw talent they have and all this stuff. Suddenly that kid starts internalizing this to, I'm a really good violinist or maybe a really good musician. Yeah. Well, let's say they want to start practicing the guitar, but it doesn't come easily.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is they're going to go, the guitar is stupid.
I can't do the guitar. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a threat to that sense of self that they've created, which is that talent and ability is something fixed, something I was born with.
Yeah,
right? And so I can't improve it. Whereas a growth mindset is exactly the opposite. So a growth mindset, what you believe is that change and improvement is a result of my effort. It's not a result of my innate talent or intelligence. It's a result of my effort. So if I just keep practicing, I'll get better. Challenge is no longer a threat. It's exciting. You start embracing challenge because challenge means growth.
You can do that. Wow. And as kids, oh my gosh, the adults around us have so much power to influence us in a good way or a negative way.
Yeah. And the way that adults influence kids to adopt a growth mindset is they praise effort
Yeah.
instead of ability.
Yep.
You don't say, oh, you're so smart. You say, oh, you worked so hard to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing this with my daughter all the time. She learned to swim last year, and we're reflecting on how she did that.
Yeah.
Because she tried and she practiced and she spent so much time in the pool. And in the beginning, we couldn't do that. And she can see her progress over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like there's like born swimmers in the world, as much as we might like to think that. That's not how skill acquisition occurs.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, now, James, I'm having this moment of feeling like a good mom because I've told my son almost his whole life when he's scared of doing something new, I say, it's only hard because you've never done it before, or it's only scary because you've never done it before. And once you get through it, then it won't be so hard or scary. Sounds like that fits right in with what you're saying.
That's right.
So, yay. I've been learning with the business and Couch to Active, a concept that they call, it's the story brand with Donald Miller. I love his stuff. He says, you confuse, you lose. And you want to build a story in marketing to people to help them be able to understand things really easily. And he talks about limited energy use all the time, that our brain, it takes energy to learn something new. And so if you have a company or a business, or you're trying to explain something to your kid, and it's a lot of energy for that person to understand it, their brain says, oh, that's too hard. Tell me more about that. And as far as what you have been doing or working with people around energy usage and brain and habit and all that good stuff. Yeah.
This is why your brain doesn't, again, thinking back to that metaphor, it wants to get back onto the well-worn habits. Back onto the freeway. So if the habit, the well-worn habit is hitting snooze 5 times, that's okay. Your brain doesn't care if it's good or bad for you. It just likes it because it's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy because it hasn't been done again and again and again. Now, there are those out there, right, who exercise is just as easy as not exercising. Meaning that if they don't do it, they feel much worse and they can't imagine themselves not doing it. And again, for a lot of people out there, that the fact that there are people like that sounds crazy.
Like, what? Right? Those people?
Like, who are those people?
I'll never be one of those. And there's the self-talk, right? Yep.
Yeah. But this is purely a matter of usage. Purely a matter of usage. So exercise can become that 6-lane freeway if you do it every day for a certain period of time. Now, you have to convince the brain to get over that hump, because again, when you're driving on the sagebrush, it is hard. It does suck. It's not fun.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's kind of painful.
Yeah.
But what you've got to be able to see the long game and not get stuck in the short game, because the short game is, oh my gosh, just want to get back on the freeway.
Yeah. Not
doing what I'm trying to do now because it's hard.
It's really hard.
But if you can stick with it for 2 months, then it's going to be easy.
Yeah.
If it's not completely easy at that point, it will be much easier, no question, but it might actually just be easy at that point. And so it's really getting over those first 2 months, those first 66 days. That's the danger zone. That's the part where we stop. Your brain's like an energy scrooge. You know?
I don't know what you're talking about. Not me.
So we've got this. We've actually got plenty of energy in our brains and our bodies. But imagine Uncle Scrooge like in front of his vault of massive amounts of resources. In this case, it's energy, right? Just doesn't like to use it, doesn't like to spend it. And so you've got to convince your brain that it's worth spending. And in some ways, in those first 2 months, it's not going to be convinced. So you've got to do other things to work around that. You'll feel all sorts of resistance those first 2 months, all sorts of resistance.
Oh, yeah.
So whatever you got to do, and again, part of mine is an accountability partner that I text every day when I do it. Part of it is, again, my calendar system where I've got the streak going where I'm just like, oh, I can't break the chain, you know? Part of it is the mental commitment of going from like, this is non-negotiable. I've made these particular habits for these 2 months completely non-negotiable.
I love that. We talk about exercise not being negotiable. And it also sounds then like those tactics that you have for that commitment to the health are helping to put you in a position where you don't have to rely on so much grit and willpower. Because it seems like those 2 months is where the grit and willpower comes in.
That's right.
And we don't want to live a life of gritting everything out. That's no fun. But if we know with neuroplasticity, we can train our brain to go from a tricycle to a faster than a Tesla.
Yeah.
And we know that it'll take 2 months, but we want to get there. Then that science can help us stay motivated to use the grit and discipline to get through those 2 months. So then we don't need so much grit and discipline because we finally have, ta-da, the habit.
That's right. Suddenly you're on that multi-lane freeway with no traffic. You listen, you're having a lovely conversation with your significant other, listening to Coldplay and talking about the weather, It's easy again. Mm-hmm. And it does. You're right. The science creates like a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Where and you can actually see it. It's like a timeline. You're like, oh, it's just for that long? And then it becomes easy. Oh, got it.
Then I can do it. I'm not in it forever. And when I know it is 66 or maybe 80 days, but probably not 21 days. I know you said the range is somewhere between 18 and 80. I'm like, I'm going to hack the 18 days. No, no, that's not true. That hasn't worked for me so far.
Exercise is a hard one. But think of how much energy output there is in exercise.
Oh, huge.
Again, your brain's not lazy. It's energy efficient.
Mm-hmm. And your body. Both of them. That's
right. So the fact that it's an energy scrooge, another way to reframe that is, no, it just doesn't like to expend energy. It doesn't have to because it might need it for a rainy day. So this is about keeping us safe and alive. And this is also why we pack on energy in the form of fat.
Yep.
Our brain's really good at keeping us alive, but it doesn't really, it needs a little bit of help making us happy. That's alive and keeping us happy or thriving. Those are two very different things, but your brain's primary priority is just to keep you safe and alive.
Oh, James, this is awesome. Is there anything else you would like us to know before I go into my question about what do you normally not share? Anything else we need to be thinking?
Yeah, that battery. So your brain is like your cell phone battery. So wake up with a full charge. Mm-hmm. If you need to recharge it through the day, you can. The biggest recharge of all is sleep, but there's other things you can do to recharge. Yoga, meditation. I love the afternoon nap, so a 27-minute nap in the afternoon. Music, going for a walk, and periodically recharge that battery throughout the day, not just at night.
Oh, that's great. And is there anything else, James, today that you would like to share that you think would inspire folks who are sitting on the couch today saying, that's all good and great, but man, you don't know where I am right now. And it's hard and I'm depressed. And is there anything else you want to share with them to maybe help them feel encouraged to give it a try?
Yeah, one of the things that I've just started sharing in the last month or two, because it's been a lifelong story that I've basically hidden my whole life, which is that I struggled for decades with OCD, which is one of the reasons I got so interested in neuroplasticity and psychology in the first place. And one of the things that sparked this Deep Change project actually was in the 2 or 3 years before I started this, through mindfulness and meditation, I was able to minimize those symptoms by about 80%.
Wow.
And so, and this was something that for me was this gnarly, ugly, embarrassing, the emotion around it was shame.
Yeah. Yes. That's why we hide it, right?
So I just hid it. I was a master hider of this thing. Mm-hmm. So not only can you rewire your brain, but you can rewire around pretty gnarly stuff. And for me, again, doing this as I'm self-experimenting. I'm doing it on myself, right?
Yeah.
And I've watched my brain change in those years. I'm like, wow, if I could do that, what else could I do, right? That's sort of one of the things that really inspired me to start this Deep Change project.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, I got to dive a little deeper. I'm just fascinated by this. If you could give advice to somebody who also has something they're dealing with that they've been silent about because of because of the shame, which I hate that word. I wish I'm doing my part to help eliminate shame in the world. But if you had any advice for somebody who was at that point where they knew if they just put it on the table, they would be met with compassion, or there is hope for them, they can get through it. For those folks right there, what advice would you give them?
Part of it's about what I've done, and not to say, so most of my learning, of course, comes from my own experience. So I say that mostly as this is what's worked for me, but I don't guarantee that it'll work for you,
Absolutely.
I guess.
We know that. Yep.
For me, it's been really important to share that story with very, very close, trusted others first. So this is my wife, a couple siblings,
Mm-hmm.
and then some really close friends. That's sort of how I started to kind of break out to even be able to share that in public, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it sort of naturally and organically grew from there. But I think one of the things that's been the most powerful is knowing that I have this secure foundation between my wife and I.
I love that.
It's hard won. We all know this, relationships don't, good relationships, rich relationships, they just take work, and so it's not something you just coast into.
I'm on my second marriage. I have no idea what you're talking about. So.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's something that as you look deeper into some of the emotional, I'm thinking of attachment research right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to do a fair amount with kind of rebuilding a secure attachment between my wife and I that healed some of the pain from my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. And a lot of my pain was around this OCD stuff that I didn't understand what it was at the time. I didn't, my parents weren't really guiding me through this. I was like, whoa, okay, so I'm alone. I've got to figure this out on my own. So then I became like, I had these different personas at different times in my life. First, I was the pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
I became the pleaser because I wanted to be anything other than what I was, because who I was fundamentally flawed. Then I became the scientist, where I was like, oh, I need to study this. I need to figure it out. I need to go to psychology. I need to work with some of the best psychologists in the world. So I went to Columbia and I worked with Walter Mischel, the marshmallow tests.
Yeah.
So he was my mentor at Columbia. And I worked at the Yale Emotional Intelligence Center, and I worked with Nalini Ambati. The Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink is based on a lot of her research.
I've got that on my shelf over there. Mm-hmm.
So I was just like, oh, I need to figure out how the brain works. I'm like going all the way, right? So then I became the scientist. But again, all of this was in reaction to something that wasn't healed, if that makes sense. And so for me, a lot of the journey has been about walking into that hurt and that pain, and in a kind of facilitated way. And Sue Johnson, her book, Hold Me Tight. So she's the one who's really created a way for people to heal past pain with insecure attachment issues early in childhood. It's really powerful research. Part of it for me has been getting out of my head and into my heart, truthfully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can think through this stuff all day long, and it turns out it doesn't heal the pain.
Yeah, you do. You gotta get to the heart of it. James, this is fantastic. And thank you so much for diving deep with us and just really sharing your heart. I so appreciate that. And I know right now I'm going to hear from listeners, and I'll pass on the memos from them about just how your story can help them, because I think I didn't know going into this interview. I just saw this, James Garrett, who knows neuroplasticity, and he's got it all together, and he's got a, program and all these wonderful things. And to hear you're human is so refreshing. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
If I could ask you to leave folks with one thing, let's pretend they're out for a walk or on the couch and they're not going to follow up on anything at all because they're just busy. But right now they're going to tune into you on the one thing they need to take away from this talk today. What would you want them to take?
So I've already said that you're deeply powerful, like your potential is way more than you ever expected. So I'm not going to use that one up because we've already used it, but that's probably what I'd say if I hadn't already said that.
That's good.
The next thing I would say is be kind to yourself. And there's a lot of good research around this. Kristen Neff's lab at UT Austin has shown that self-compassion it's not just, it's an effective behavior change strategy. It's not just something that's sort of fluffy and squishy the way we might think, right? It's or sort of like, it's nice to be nice to ourselves. Like, it's like quaint. No. This is like hard-nosed science that shows that if you're kind to yourself, when you screw up, when you don't stay on line with your goals, when you lose your temper or you blow up at somebody you love, whatever the thing you do is that you're not kind of thrilled with yourself about, which Welcome to being human. We all do it.
Yep.
To just see it, to not beat yourself up about it and say, it's okay. I'm just human. And actually soothe how hard things are for you right now. Soothe that stress that's driving that overreaction, right? Soothe. It's about soothing yourself, which is what you actually need. You don't need to pile on more stress by beating yourself up. What you need is to be soothed. And once you're soothed, you deactivate that stress response. You can think clearly again. And at that point, you can realign with your goals. But if you're always running away from the negative emotion, what the researchers find is you go right back to the negative. So if you feel bad for eating a donut, for example, or feel guilty about it, most likely you're going to go back to eating more donuts to get rid of the guilt for eating a donut in the first place. I know it sounds crazy.
No, it's not.
This is a
Trust me.
downward spiral, right?
You're preaching to the choir. We know you're not crazy on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Thank you. Thank you so much, James. And if folks want to get a hold of you, or I hear you have a free resource, how do they do that?
Yeah. So if you just text the word brain, 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 to the number 44144, that will spit you back a link and will give you access to one of my courses on habits and neuroplasticity. So it's a $200 course. It will teach you all of the science of habits and habit formation, basically everything out there in a condensed, easy to understand, easy to digest way. Again, it's text brain to 44144.
And that's so easy for the brain to remember. Is this a $200 course that you're giving away for free, or it's a $200 paid course?
For the listeners, I'm giving it away for free.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you guys, did you hear that? And James made it easy for us. Brain, BRAIN, at 44144. You'll get a link to it. If I had my phone next to me, James, I'd be doing it right now. But I'm going to do this before I even edit this episode with you. James, so great to have this conversation with you. I got a lot out of it. Part of the reason I love to do this podcast is I feel like I get a bunch of free coaching from amazing experts. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, here's the top things from this episode. One, you did hear James say, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. So remind yourself over and over this week to be kind to yourself. And number two, all of these are found on couchtoactive.com/29. So you can head over there and get your reminder of these. Number two, James Garrett offered us a free copy of his Brain by Design course. If you simply text the word brain to the number 44144, it'll send you a link where you can get signed up for his free Brain by Design course. And then if you'd like to learn more about James and what he does, you can look him up at www.brainbydesign.com/deep-change-project. And that'll be in the show notes also. Send James a memo. Tell him thanks for coming on our Couch to Active podcast. Then the last thing is the Couch to Active podcast for July and August. I am excited for the month of July and August. For the first time, we are going to go through all 8 weeks of this book in a row, and I will be covering the key points of each section of this book as if I was your friend sitting on the couch with you, or as if I was a leader of a book club doing a Couch to Active book club. We'll go through the key concepts of each section of the book, and at the end of each podcast, I will do my darndest to summarize that entire section in one key takeaway for you. So you'll be able to walk away and say, what is the one thing that I want to do to change my life based on this section of this book? And I will do my darndest to distill it down to one thing. So at the end, you'll have 8 or 9 things that are the key concepts of the full 256-page book. So that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. So now is the time to get your copy of Couch to Active so you can have that with you while we go through the Couch to Active book together this summer. You won't want to miss out. Alrighty, friends. Next week's podcast, I am going to take my very best stab at the first of several body shaming episodes. I know a lot of you following me know that I've been working on an episode around the topic of fat shaming. So next week, you'll get a glimpse in to be able to hear snippets of people I've been interviewing and just to get you a better glimpse in a more meaningful way than you have ever before. That's coming next week. Until then, have yourselves a fabulous, fabulous rest of your week. We'll see you same time, same place next week. Thanks for listening to the Couch Detective podcast, where I believe that exercise should not be dreadful, but getting off the couch is the hardest thing we do. Bye-bye now.